Well, good afternoon and good evening to everyone. My name is Betsy Moe. I'm a mission co-worker in the PCUSA assigned to SEDEPCA, which is the Protestant Center for Pastoral Studies in Guatemala. I am pleased to be able to welcome all of you to today's virtual journey to Guatemala. For those of you who are not familiar with SEDEPCA's work, we are an educational organization that works toward the transformation of society in Guatemala and in other parts of Central America. And we do this through theological education. For 38 years, SEDEPCA has nurtured intercultural ties with North American churches and universities. So an intercultural gathering like this one to build understanding and to be together is a first and be together in taking action is just the kind of thing SEDEPCA's founders would have hoped for. Folks at SEDEPCA were so encouraged to learn of the wave of support and interest in Guatemala last year following Guatemala's presidential election. As many of you know, that support continued in the form of an overture being brought before this year's General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church USA. And you're going to hear more about that a bit later. But first, we know that what always brings people to our virtual journeys is a genuine desire to understand what life is like in Guatemala, what's going on right now. Now that the new president, Bernardo Arévalo, has been in leadership since January, you who care about this country from a distance are wondering if life is any different. So that's where we're going to start. First, I have an Instagram video produced by Arévalo's own administration about his first 6 months in office. In the chat, we will include a link to the video and information about how to follow Arévalo's government on Instagram if you want to follow that yourself. There are a couple options there, and the administration posts almost every day if you want that kind of update about Guatemala on a daily basis. So I'm going to share my screen and let you watch this video. Okay, so that is what the administration is saying about itself, about what they've accomplished in the first 6 months. It is about a month old, I think, since they released that video, so there's always more happening. But we wanted you to see what the administration is saying about themselves, but then hear an on-the-ground perspective from one of our brothers in Guatemala, Esvin Sirin, who lives every day and knows the reality of what it means to live in Guatemala City. So Esvin, I'm going to hand the time over to you. Many of you know him. He is a facilitator and logistics coordinator for the Intercultural Encounters program of SEDEPCA. And it's wonderful always to see and hear from Esvin. So Esvin, the time is yours. Oh, let me say, Esvin's going to speak in Spanish to us today. So if you want to listen to Esvin in Spanish, you don't have to do anything. But if you want to hear the English interpretation, now's the time to go down to the bottom of your screen and click the interpretation tool. You're going to click English. And when Esvin is done, you will click the tool again and go back to original audio. You can go back and forth as much as you want. If you want to try listening in Spanish, that's fine. But if you have any problems with your interpretation tool, go ahead and message Nancy, send her a private message, Nancy Carrera, and she may be able to help you with that. Okay, Esvin.
Gracias, Betsy.
Thank you, Betsy, for this time.
Hi, everyone. My name is Esvin Sirian, and thank you. Thank you for this time.
I want to start by saying that as a citizen, as a parent, as a Christian person committed to my community, I have had high expectations of this new administration. Bernardo Arévalo, Karen Herrera, and their administration. Of course, changes do not happen as we expect. Sometimes they take time, and it has been a process with a lot of passivity. Personally, I feel that now it's been 9 months since the administration took office. It has been a very slow process. Possibly a plan for governance was proposed, but in reality, in the implementation, there have been many changes to that plan. Ministers have been dismissed for acts of corruption. Some others have been replaced. Some have resigned. So, I feel that we continue in that same uncertainty of how the government is going to make changes to address the problems that have been affecting us. For example, in the video that we saw, the government says that schools have been renovated, but very little has been done. In fact, last month, we were in a school in Coban, Alta Verapaz, and the facilities look almost the same. We have also felt the increase in the cost of basic food basket of products that we consume daily. There has been a fairly high increase, and that, of course, worries us personally. But also when we see that reality in the communities, in rural areas, where the impact is even greater. We do not see a government. Personally, I don't see a government making more direct decisions. I think that it is lacking in this. I don't know if it is in the advice that he, the president, is receiving. I still have doubts. His media communications are still a bit ambiguous in terms of what he is telling us. Just to give an example, 2 or 3 months ago, there was a problem on the highway that connects the Pacific coast of the country to an important port in Guatemala, and it was supposed to take 1 or 2 months to be fixed. But the process of fixing it is still ongoing. Practically speaking, that has been one of the causes that has driven up the cost of the basic food basket. It has caused a lot of traffic, and just in that period of time, there was a change of minister who was in charge of working on those areas. I think that the flame, the hope that many Guatemalans had with this new administration is slowly fading, extinguishing. Although, of course, we don't lose hope, but at some point, people do. We are losing patience in the sense that we ask ourselves when we're going to move forward, when there will be concrete changes and an implementation of the entire proposal that was brought. Of course, we don't want to be naive knowing that there is still a small contingent and that this small group has two pillars that support them, the Congress of the Republic and the Public Ministry, which do not allow these government proposals to advance, which are holding back the entire democratic process, the entire process that the new administration wants to implement because they continue to cling to and to continue maintaining the power to do business, the power to benefit from everything that can be given through the government of the Republic. Sometimes I am also worried about the passivity of the people of Guatemala, because although the new administration was able to take a position with the help of the indigenous people, I think that we should still continue to support these changes. Without a doubt, we need a restructuring at all levels. As a parent, I'm also very concerned because even though the intention is there, even though we want something different, and we have an administration that promises us something different, their hands are tied by these small groups in power that do not allow us to move forward. An example of this is also that the government budget that needs to be expanded to be able to implement infrastructure, education, health, and security has been a problem in that Congress itself is not able to approve this increase. This is key because if there is not budget, plans cannot be implemented. We cannot work with the different sectors that we need in our country. This budget was recently approved, but the Constitutional Court set injunctions that may not be approved. So, there are many angles in which this government has been attacked and diminished so that it cannot implement or do the work that must be done and be able to address the causes and roots of what is happening in our country. Without a doubt, it's hard work, and we know that the government is not going to do everything. It needs a lot of support from the people of Guatemala, from the indigenous communities. Something that we must also be critical of with this new government is the fact that little has been taken into account in terms of setting indigenous peoples in strategic positions. In fact, there is only one indigenous woman who holds a position in the Congress and in the other ministries. And in many cases, the same politicians who have been in previous administrations have been recycled. It is difficult when the same people continue to be in power because changes will not be seen. That worries me a lot. We have also seen how the public ministry has become a systematic tool to continue silencing the voices of those who want change and fight for change in our country. In short, the work continues to be hard, and we continue to work from each space that we can and hope that a moment may come, perhaps with the resignation or dismissal of the Attorney General Consuelo Porras, and that from there a change can take place, a new spring in our country. That's all I will say.
Thank you. And at this time, you may all switch back to your original audio down at the interpretation tool. And now I'm going to hand it over to Doug Michael. Doug, take it away.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you, Esveen, for all of your words and all that you're doing there at SEDEPCA. We're all grateful. My name is Doug Michael, and I'm co-chair of the Guatemala Partnership Committee of the Presbytery of Western North Carolina. Our presbytery was the sponsoring presbytery for an overture in support of the people of Guatemala. And I'm here today with Carrie Satoff, who will introduce herself shortly, to speak a little bit to that overture, where it came from and where we might take it. This overture, as a result of the actions of the 226th General Assembly, became a resolution. And you've just heard a good summary of the current political climate and the situation in Guatemala. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit to talk about some other context and to talk a bit about a personal story that led us to draft and develop and submit this overture that we'll talk about. Carrie will then refresh us on what an overture means, what it does, and share the specific content of what is now a resolution. And then finally, Betsy and Tracy King Ortega will lead us in a period of reflection and some discussion as we consider how we can actively work in order to turn the aspirations of this resolution into reality. Presbyterians have been serving in Guatemala since 1882, when missionaries were personally invited by President Justo Barrios to come to the country in an effort to encourage Protestant growth. By 1950, 5 presbyteries had been established across the country, and in 1962, the National Presbyterian Church was formed. Today, at least 13 presbyteries in the US have formal partnerships in Guatemala, including the 5 that supported the overture at General Assembly. Those are the Presbytery of Western North Carolina, Presbytery of Albany, Baltimore, England Northwest, and Newcastle. It seems appropriate at this point to note something about the bonds that we share. Each of these presbyteries has ties to SEDEPCA. We've all traveled with SEDEPCA. Most have a member of their group sitting on the board of SEDEPCA USA. Beyond that, there are connections that we share that are represented in each window of this call. We're different parts of Christ's body linked together in a multitude of ways, and this offers us rich opportunities in ministry. Although our partnerships and the way we do mission have greatly evolved over the last century, many PCUSA churches and presbyteries continue to walk alongside our Guatemalan partners, building strong relationships with our sisters and brothers and promoting transformative developmental activities together. The Presbytery of Western North Carolina has been engaged in partnership with 2 Guatemalan presbyteries since 1994. During these 30 years, we've shared hopes and dreams while working and spending time together. The photos you're seeing reflect ministries that are familiar to us all: scholarships for children, for university students, and for theological students, nutrition and health initiatives, microloans and training for women, and domestic violence prevention programs for men and couples. We worship, break bread, and just enjoy being together. And along the way, we've come to understand much of the deep injustice and inequity that exists in Guatemala, witnessing how it extends to every aspect of daily life for our partners, such as you've just heard. In October of last year, 8 members of our partnership group traveled to Guatemala. Due to the pandemic, it would be the first visit in several years for most of us, and so it would be important for both personal and programmatic reasons. And there was a broader context as well. Some of it was just recently reviewed. National elections had just been held in Guatemala in August, and following Bernardo Arevalo's election, the existing power structure began to engage in a great deal of anti-democratic activity in an effort to overturn those results. Just prior to our arrival, the Attorney General had instigated an armed raid of the Independent Election Authority, further elevating national and international tensions. And so we arrived in Guatemala just as peaceful nationwide protests erupted and escalated. These are vivid memories for many of you. Thousands of citizens gathered, blocked traffic at approximately 100 key locations throughout the country. Commerce and travel were paralyzed, and it was necessary for us to remain in the capital and manage all our communications remotely. Over the next several days, we contacted partners, we watched the news, and learned how quickly difficult lives can become truly precarious. Early on, we were able to meet in person with Osmundo Ponce, a pastor from one of our partner presbyteries, who was in Guatemala City at the time and who's here with us this evening. He suggested some ways that we might consider continuing to support our partners. On our last full day in the country, we gathered for a Zoom call with 8 of our partners, pastors and elders, who were scattered throughout their presbytery. Neither a pandemic nor a political crisis can apparently keep Presbyterians from having a meeting. Although we had an enormous amount of programmatic work to attend to, we needed to table the entirety of our scheduled agenda. And as you can see from this somewhat depressing photo, we were saddened by the inability to be with each other physically. And we simply listened as our partners, in turn, described life in their communities during this week of national crisis. The stories were vivid, they were wrenching. In an effort to be heard, the people of Guatemala were willingly undertaking hardships while their leaders remained unaffected. This is the part of the story that prompted us eventually to draft the overture, and the story that will remain with me always. When we asked what we could do in addition to offering our prayers, our partners requested that we bring their concerns and their needs to the attention of the larger church in the U.S. We didn't know what that might look like, but agreed to do that, and we returned to conclude our long and challenging meeting. Sometimes when we communicate remotely, cues can be missed, and we fail to appreciate the impact of what has been said and heard. And so we were not prepared for the response when we asked if one of our partners in one of our group would offer closing prayers for this meeting. We looked from face to face on the screen, much as we're doing now, and we saw one after another our Guatemalan pastor friends who typically pray as easily as they breathe, shaking their heads, wiping away tears, and murmuring, "No puedo, I can't." The people of Guatemala yearned to be heard, and it seemed that our partners felt that we had listened well, and they were grateful beyond words. It was a humbling and deeply touching moment. This resolution then came to General Assembly as a request from our partners and their brothers and sisters across the country, whose governments have been systematically rendering them voiceless. They need the interventions that are requested here, and they should know that they have been heard and that we will continue to listen. Carrie? You're muted, Carrie.
Sorry, thank you. So thanks, Doug, for that touching story and response. I'm Carrie Satoff, co-chair of the Guatemala Partnership of Newcastle Presbytery and board president of SEDEPCA USA. So just to level set, a quick tutorial on what an overture is in PCUSA and what it means. An overture is a request for a formal action. Esvin, you can go back two more. One more. There you go. Okay, perfect, right there. So just to level set, an overture is a request for a formal action brought to General Assembly by a presbytery or synod. In this case, Western North Carolina drafted the overture and 4 other presbyteries concurred, which is a really impressive number. A lot of overtures only have 1 or 2 concurring presbyteries. So this year, General Assembly was held in Salt Lake City from June 25th to July 4th. Esvin, you can advance the slide. Perfect. And one more, Esvin. Doug and I made a formal presentation via Zoom to the International Engagement Committee at General Assembly. And after 3 hours, due to technical difficulties and discussion, they unanimously approved the overture with 2 very minor amendments. The overture was then taken to GA for a full vote and passed in the consent agenda. So we were really happy about that. So now that this overture has been approved, it is called a resolution and serves as the official position of the PCUSA and informs all decisions by the offices of PCUSA related to their work in advocacy for peace and justice in Guatemala and supporting the Arevalo administration. Esvin, you can go one more slide, please. There you go. This includes the Office of Public Witness, located on Capitol Hill in DC, the Presbyterian Office of the UN in New York, and the Office of the Stated Clerk. So this resolution is not very long, and I just wanted to share with you the 5 action items it calls for. And as I read through it, I invite you to think about and even jot down notes about how you, personally, your congregation, and your partnership can help bring this resolution to life. And afterwards, we will have a time to brainstorm together on how to do this and perhaps create a team. And if you have any questions as we go, please put them in the chat. And also, while we're going through this, Cheryl will add a link to the chat to the full resolution as approved with an in-depth rationale. And if you wish to read it later, you can do that. Okay, Esvin, can you go back 1 slide, please? One more. There you go. Okay, so we express our support and care for the people of Guatemala by doing the following: encouraging PCUSA agencies, mid-councils, congregations, and individual Presbyterians to pray and work for peace wherever they are engaged, mostly in their partnerships. Become more aware of the past history and the present reality of life in Guatemala. Work for the people of Guatemala through partnerships where mutuality is fostered, and advocate with legislators to support peace and justice for the marginalized, oppressed, and voiceless majority of the Guatemalan people. Next slide, Esvin. Thank you. It also calls for us to direct PCUSA media outlets, some of whom I know are on this call right now. Thank you, Mike Ferguson. Direct PCUSA media outlets to inform churches and individuals of the nature of the present crisis in Guatemala and of the opportunities for walking with our brothers and sisters there, and to direct the stated clerk, with guidance from the Office of Public Witness in Washington, to urge the U.S. administration to continue engaging President Arevalo and Vice President Herrera to demonstrate its support for their efforts to give voice to the Guatemalan people following the free and fair 2023 elections and reform the corrupt systems that impact every aspect of daily life in Guatemala. Also, to direct the Office of Public Witness in coordination and collaboration with ecumenical partners to urge the administration, whichever one it happens to be, and Congress to energetically engage in diplomacy over the long term to more effectively implement U.S. policy goals, meaning the elimination of corruption, support for the rule of law, reduction of violence, and addressing the root causes of poverty, lack of basic services, and inadequate opportunity. And that would also benefit the people of Guatemala and stabilize the society. And in coordination with its partners, to urge the administration and Congress to more effectively utilize targeted sanctions, including the use of the Maginski sanctions when appropriate, toward those individuals who persist in corruption and anti-democratic activities in Guatemala, and to provide educational resources that encourage and facilitate Presbyterians to engage in advocacy with their lawmakers. And then finally, to direct the Presbyterian Office at the United Nations to engage the UN, the Organization of American States, and other international groups which support and can influence democratic reforms and work for peace and justice of Guatemala. So I know that's a lot of words, but we just kind of wanted to go over that so you could see how clear and concise the overture is and the actions that it calls for. So now I'm going to turn the program back over to Betsy and Tracy King Ortega for a reflection on how we can ensure that this resolution becomes an instrument for peace and justice and not just words on a page. So Betsy?
Great. Thank you so much, Carrie. Before Tracy talks from the PCUSA perspective, I wanted to offer a bit of a theological reflection, since that's what we at SEDEPCA do, and that's what we're gifted to do among the people of Guatemala and our friends and partners in the U.S. So I wanted to focus on really two things tonight, and to get us to think about this idea of praying and working for peace. The first thing is, when we think about praying and working for peace, what is that peace? Because peace is not necessarily the absence of war, but it is something that is more all-encompassing. In the Hebrew Bible, we use the word shalom, and shalom is a much broader word than our word peace. Shalom is a word that calls to mind wholeness for the community, not just wholeness for individuals, but wholeness for community. It calls to mind well-being, and certainly that sense of peace and that all is well, of an assurance of God's faithfulness and goodness. But I really like to think of wholeness. If sin is characterized by a disordering of human relationship with ourselves, relationship with one another, relationship among nations, our relationships within systems, if sin is a disordering of all of that, shalom is a reordering. It is that wholeness that Christ brings. So that's one thing. When we pray and work for peace, I would love for all of us to imagine the shalom that we are praying for, this wholeness for the people of God, and not just wholeness for one people, but wholeness for all people, all of God's children. The second thing is, sometimes when we're praying or when we're acting, when we're taking actions, it is really hard to get overwhelmed by the darkness that's around us, either in our own US politics, when we think about Guatemalan politics, world relations. It is an overwhelming thing to situate ourselves as the people of God in prayer, because there is so much darkness and it's very easy to lose hope. But one thing, I regularly get these email updates from a pastor and writer in Virginia named Marianne McKibben Dana. And she had posted a few months ago this quote that I've been ruminating on, and I wanted to share it with all of you. It's a quote by Valerie Carr, and it says, "What if this present darkness that we're facing is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of a womb? What if the darkness that we are living and facing is not the darkness of a tomb, but the darkness of the womb?" It is this idea that we could be experiencing darkness, as in new life is on its way. And isn't that what we're all called into when we place ourselves as baptized into the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ? That this possibility that God is working in the darkness and that we are a part of the new creation, that God is always working, the new creation that is alive every day, that newness that is experienced every morning, because God is here and God is at work. So praying and working for shalom and praying in the hope of Jesus Christ, that we could be in the just in the womb, and God is doing something new among us. Tracy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Betsy. And thank you for the invitation to be a part of this presentation and conversation today. It really brings me great joy to see international partnerships bear fruits such as this resolution that we heard about now. I've been accompanying partnerships between U.S. Presbyterian or U.S. churches and partners throughout Central America for over 25 years. For me, this work exemplifies the hope and dreams that we have for these kinds of mission relationships. It restores my belief that through mutual relationship, through listening to and accompanying one another, we will be able to discern ways that we as individuals and as a church can have an impact. These cross-cultural relationships can and should shape how we choose to be present in the world. These relationships, these partnerships also challenge us to work together for peace and justice in tangible ways. So before I shift into discussing the work before us, I want to take a moment to respond in part to Betsy's reflection and to this particular moment in time. I'm not as intimately familiar with the Guatemala context per se, but as many of you on this call are. Nevertheless, I have been following the situation, and I want to place it a bit in contrast to what is happening in other parts of the region. I also want to tell you why I just love this framing question that Betsy shared of what if this darkness we are experiencing is not a tomb, but a womb. Central America in other parts or in general is experiencing rising authoritarianism. Particularly coming to mind is Nicaragua and El Salvador. The situations in those two countries are extremely complicated, both in similar and different ways that are making it very difficult to imagine what kind of change is feasible. Given the tight government controls, the extreme limitations on citizen participation, and the downright fear of speaking out, it is hard to know what to advocate for and seemingly harder to hold on to hope. However, at this moment in time in Guatemala, there is an administration that is seeking to strengthen democracy and combat corruption. It was touch and go for a drawn out period between the elections and President Arevalos' inauguration, which is exactly the context and time frame in which the overture was drafted. But by the time our General Assembly rolled around and this overture was to be decided upon, thankfully, the Guatemalan context had changed. President Arevalo has been in office now for several months. And as we heard from Esvin, he's not been able to accomplish everything on his agenda, primarily because of other powers that be controlling the judicial branch and other economic elites who are not in favor of the Semilla Party's agenda. Nevertheless, it is a huge win for democracy that Arevalo is in power and moving forward. So perhaps Betsy is right. These difficult days could be a womb, and this resolution is our attempt at being maybe not midwives, but maybe doulas who are learning and encouraging and advocating for ways that can make the path towards a strong democracy a bit more viable. So what exactly is the work ahead of us? As Carrie mentioned, this item of business was approved on the consent agenda. In some ways, that's great, but the one drawback of that is it didn't really get seen. That means we need to put in some extra effort to shine a light on what is now an official mandate for the church. It should be a surprise to no one, but what is decided at General Assembly doesn't just magically happen. In order for us to give life to these important decisions for our church and our partners, it requires insistence and persistence. For that reason, we are proposing the formation of a team that will guide and encourage the implementation of this resolution. Some things that the resolution calls for are already happening. Thanks to SEDEPCA's leadership, this webinar is an example of ways that we can educate ourselves about the context and get the word out about ways we can advocate for Guatemala. I know that SEDEPCA is committed to hosting 2 virtual journeys each year. They are open to anybody and are a great way to stay connected and to continue learning. The second point of the resolution is to direct PCUSA media outlets to inform churches and individuals of the nature of the present crisis in Guatemala and of the opportunities for walking with our siblings. Joining us on the call today, as Carrie mentioned, is Mike Ferguson from the PCUSA Communications Department. Mike and his colleagues are wonderful allies in this work and are always eager to share our stories and those of our mission partners. These items mentioned, as well as all the other actions called for in the resolution, are not one and done kind of things. In order to achieve the impact that we are hoping for, we need a team committed to being persistent and making all this happen. I imagine the role of this team to be monitoring, advocating, and inviting broader participation. This team will work together to continue to listen and discern opportunities for implementation. Doug Michael has offered to lead this team, but additional leadership, maybe a co-leader or a co-convener, would be helpful. If you're feeling pulled to be more involved, to do more for the people of Guatemala, perhaps in new ways, go ahead and put your name in the chat as an indication that you are interested in being a part of this team. Leslie Vogel, Regional Liaison for Guatemala and Mexico, and Stellar Interpreter, and myself are committed to accompanying and advising the team. We are eager to help identify opportunities and to connect you with our people in the Office of Public Witness, the Presbyterian Ministry of the United Nations, and Presbyterian media outlets. I realize that today has been primarily focused on PCUSA, and that not everyone on this call is necessarily Presbyterian. This work is by no means meant to be exclusive. We welcome anyone who wants to participate with us in these efforts. And at the same time, I want to encourage those from other denominations to research the mechanisms available to you to do similar work. Hopefully, the success of this resolution to express support and care for the people of Guatemala can inspire others to do similar work. The remainder of our time is open for conversation. We want to hear from you. Please tell us your thoughts, reactions, and hopefully the tangible ways that you feel inspired to engage. To get that conversation going, we prepared a poll. So Nancy's going to launch that poll, and we're asking you to let us know which action item you can imagine yourself engaging in. So you can choose more than one. Educate myself and or others about the past history and current reality of life in Guatemala. Write articles and reflections about your partnership and connection with Guatemala to share with media outlets. Advocate with legislators. Consider inviting, encouraging, and or sponsoring a young person to participate in a SEDEPCA intercultural encounter. And join the team that will give and encourage the implementation of this resolution on Guatemala. So we'll give you a few minutes to answer, and then we'll see the results and open it up for conversation. Nancy, how's the poll going?
We have 48 responses of 65.
Right.
So do we need more time, like a minute or so?
Yeah, let's take like 20 more seconds.
Okay.
And thank you for those of you who are putting your name in the chat. That's really helpful. And we're collecting. I see Carrie's writing down those names right now. Yeah, thank you all. Yeah, you have to check one. That's right. There's not a way out.
And what I realized we didn't include on the list was praying, which really is a worthwhile endeavor, but we want to pray and work.
Okay, well, can we post the results and see where we're at with the poll?
Sure, give me 1 second.
Yeah, we can see it. This is great. Yeah, so let these poll results be an encouragement to all of you that we're in this together. We're not trying to do things alone, and this is how God works through the body. So, okay, you can close your poll if you are still there. We've been joined a little late by Dr. Ana Silvia Monzon, who is a champion of women's rights. She's a social scientist. She's a professor who has taught at SEDEPCA about gender. She's taught other places as well, but about gender, feminism, migration, human rights, violence, and justice. And she's a Guatemalan woman who's politically engaged and invested in the thriving of all people there. So since we have a few more minutes, Ana Silvia, hello, hola, bienvenida. Are you still? Todavía está.
Todavía estoy por acá. Buenas tardes, ¿cómo están?
Bien, gracias. Solo un momento, por favor. If you want to use your interpretation tool and hear a few comments from Dr. Monzon, you can go back to your interpretation and click on your English because you want to hear it in English. Ana Silvia, first of all, I want to apologize because I'm like the country in a perfect storm. I come from the Rafael Landivar University, where in fact a meeting of social scientists is taking place, and also the process of the nominating committees for the new magistrates of the courts. So I managed to make a stop so that I could be in contact with you all, and I thank you very much for waiting for me. I would like to basically state in these few minutes that the situation of our country, well, we already know from all past history how we got to this moment in which all institutions have been co-opted, especially the institutions of justice, and how this has served as a mechanism to silence, to censor. And many people, more than 100, have had to go into exile, many in the USA, including journalists, prosecutors, judges, which has done a lot of damage to our country. Another situation that has to do with institutional co-optation is the situation with the University of San Carlos, which is the only state university here. It has been usurped and has had a very serious effect on the educational opportunities of young people. As we have been commenting in this meeting of social sciences, it's very concerning because this only option for a university education is increasingly a distant prospect for young people. University enrollment dropped by almost half due to the crisis that exists. Both the political crisis of the university and the economic crisis. That is another element that is very important to raise. The economic crisis, which has had a very serious effect on the living conditions of people. Recently, data from a survey on living conditions was presented. It was 2 weeks ago, and the analysis that these data present to us is that poverty and extreme poverty have deepened. The data, although not so reliable, show us that almost half of young people are in poverty, and that is why there is constant migration. This has not stopped despite all the dangers. Despite the difficulties, migration continues to be an escape valve. Employment conditions, all these material living conditions continue to be very difficult for the majority of people. The cost of living has increased in part as a way of creating conflict to generate problems of governability for the new government. So Bernardo Arevallo's government team is facing many situations that make every day difficult because on the one hand, they have the threat of this co-opted justice, the threat of the elites who do not care about the situation of the majority of the population and have contributed to the rise in prices. And also at the level of the Congress of the Republic, where there has been an agreement not to let legislation pass that would benefit the majority. Just getting to January 14th was an odyssey. I think I managed to hear then a little of the contribution that was made from the United States and from the people of the United States, because we're talking about two different things, something we appreciate. The same goes for the role of the OAS, and above all, the mobilization of the indigenous peoples, without whom this would not have been possible. However, since the moment of the new administration taking office, every day there's a new situation that limits the actions of the government, which came in with a very weak team, with a very weak, very new party. They have said on many occasions that they did not have the expectation of winning the elections. But here it was an interesting phenomenon because the majority believed in their proposal. And that is why we have Bernardo Arevallo now. But in very difficult conditions, with a government proposal that finds many limitations to the advancements it wants to make in every sense, at the level of health, education, employment. It's been an uphill struggle. The situation faced by the majority of people in their daily life continues to be difficult. We continue to need the eyes of the world, to not turn away from our country because there are too many interests that are historical and others that have been added that make daily life quite difficult for the population, both in the urban areas and in the rural areas. And I think that it is important to know that despite this, the resistance continues. People continue betting on this hope, but at times the energies of people also decline because it's quite complicated to face a situation in which there is no significant response being given. This is a very general view that I can share with you. If you have any specific questions, I will be here for a few minutes. Thank you. Gracias, doctora Monzón, por su perspectiva y sí, gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. I'm going to close this in prayer. Voy a orar y entonces si alguien quiere quedarse aquí por algunos pocos minutos para preguntar algo a doctora Monzón, está bien. But for now, if everyone can turn off their interpretation and go back to original audio, and I'll close us in prayer. God, we thank you for your spirit that is among us, that your spirit that has given knowledge, and tonight that we've been informed, that we've heard, that's your spirit that has opened our ears and our hearts. We thank you for tying us together as people of God who want the best for your people, who are desiring shalom, wholeness. God, give us your perspective of hope, even in the darkness, even when we look at a government or an administration that is young, that may be weak. God, you can still work through that. And we know that you will work through your people. And so guide us in our next steps as people working together for good, for the whole people of God. We give all this to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Now, if people would like to stay, you're welcome to go. We thank you for being here. It really is a great encouragement. Every single face on this screen. But if you need to go, have a great night. If you'd like to stay, you have an opportunity to ask a few questions to Doctora Ana Silvia Monzón. You're welcome to stay also. Thank you all.